Hi everyone, thank you so much. It's Phil here from Four Seasons Talent, and today I'm with Nigel Sankey from Thomas International. Thank you, Nigel, for being here.
It's a pleasure, Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, no problems, no problems. So it's been a very exciting and busy time at Four Seasons Talent. We've been working very closely with our clients recently, and we've not really been able to put much content out there. You know, work gets in the way and all that. So today is all about saying thank you to Nigel and to Thomas International for what they've done for us, for one client in particular. And I just wanted to go through the hows and the whys and really how they've helped us not only secure the client, but also put the process in place and ultimately place the best candidate available. So thank you.
Firstly, Phil, as you know, I look after sort of the northwest area for Thomas International, working with a wide range of clients, which is essentially helping them with the full employee life cycle. So everything from recruitment, retention, the development of their people and the development of their teams and indeed their cultures. I've been with Thomas for just short of 4 years now, and really in that time, as I say, it's generally understanding the challenges that different clients have in the different sectors. But there's always a theme that runs between that of helping them to find the right people that are the best fit for their particular roles and their particular culture.
Absolutely, and having those right people in place can have a massive impact on not only their company now and their company culture, but where they're moving forward. And that's kind of why we got in touch, wasn't it? So we were working with a company that's going through a period of transition. They were looking to go very much in terms of proactive, in terms of their sales approach, and they were looking for a head of sales to really drive that forward. Now, as you and I know, any good salesman at interview can sell themselves, and it's important to not only get the experience on paper and the interview as well, but we felt in consultation with our client that we needed something else more tangible to give us a bit of an insight into them, who they are, their personality, their drive, their strengths and weaknesses, to really be able to, I suppose, dig into their interview and get the most out of that time with them. So we went with the PPA assessment, and it was amazing. It was really good. It gave us that insight. Where do you feel like a PPA assessment really benefits the client?
Yeah, okay. The first thing to say, obviously, the PPA, it's a personal profile analysis, which is essentially a disc-based assessment tool. It's one of many different assessments we have in our suite at Thomas International. The PPA really adds value, I think, to the recruitment process, because one of the challenges, I think, when you're recruiting someone and looking to place somebody is actually understanding what good looks like. And that's not just from a technical capability or an experience perspective, but from a behavioural viewpoint. There was an interesting article recently in the Financial Times about how we tend to hire people for their technical capabilities, but we tend to fire them for their behavioural faults. And I think behaviours is an area that a lot of people kind of don't pay due attention to when they're looking to recruit. And really, it's absolutely paramount that you kind of understand what a good person looks like when you're recruiting, not just from that technical capability or qualification or experience perspective, which is important, of course, but the behavioural fit is very, very important. And where the PPA, I think, adds that value, you mentioned how obviously people will tend to act the role at an interview that they think people want to see. And we would call that wearing the interview mask. At that stage, to have something like a PPA that's actually a scientifically robust assessment that kind of removes that interview mask and says this is actually the person and this is their behavioural preferences, it gives you a really added value piece that you can start looking at whether this person fits your culture, whether they fit maybe the existing team culture that they're going to be placed in. And it's very much as well about understanding not just what you want to attract, but equally important, I feel, is what don't you want to attract? What qualities or behaviours do you want to avoid that could really derail things and upset an established team, perhaps?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said there is about, knowing what good looks like. We went through that journey with this client because this was a brand new role to their business, a brand new proactive role. They didn't know what good looks like. From one side, they wanted a head of sales, but they were selling into the public sector where a generic, maybe a retail head of sales or someone from the car industry, automotive, etc., it's very much, let's get the deal done, wouldn't necessarily work. And we felt that you've been amazing at being able to allow us to understand the reports and the information and really tailor that to this client. That was a huge help.
Just that one assessment, the PPA, there's a whole range of different reports that you can actually draw down just from that one assessment that perhaps takes a potential candidate 5 to 8 minutes maximum to complete. And obviously, we wouldn't advocate that somebody necessarily looks at every single report. It's about understanding what you want to get out of it. For example, you mentioned sales. If you're looking for somebody to fill a sales role, there are specific sales audit reports, for example, that look at that candidate purely from the perspective of a salesperson. What are their key strengths? What are their potential limitations in relation to that role? It looks into the sort of key motivators. What motivates them? What are their fears? How do they like to communicate? All that information is really relevant in helping you come up with the right decision, I think. And I know you looked at, I think one of our new reports actually is a talent selection report that kind of looks at what this person's going to bring to your organisation. What do they bring to the table from a behavioural perspective? Really useful for making sure you get someone of the right cultural fit as well.
So I think, understanding what good looks like, it starts from the beginning. Now, as part of this role, we weren't involved at the beginning in the job profiling. But I remember looking through the suite and seeing some amazing stuff around working with the key stakeholders to profile that job, to then almost have a I suppose it's like a framework to try and match with those candidates. What would you say to businesses that are looking for a role they've never recruited for, and how they could almost profile and maximise that search and selection stage?
Yeah, I think absolutely, Phil. One of the critical things is to consider, we said it before, what does good look like for this role and for our particular requirements, the functionality of the role, but very, very much at the forefront for myself is always that cultural fit. I guess if you were going to go out and buy a new car, you'd give some consideration to what is it I want. Do I need 2 doors or 4 doors? Do I want it to have, a diesel engine or an electric hybrid? We think about what we want and what's important, and we have a wish list. And I think it's no different with recruitment. It's really, really important to consider, what does good look like? What do we really want to attract? What's going to maximise the value of this person to our business and maximise the value of this role, particularly if it's a new role that you've not had before? And that's where we have a tool that actually is called job profiling, and it simply does that. It takes you through a process of saying, what does good look like? What do you want? There's a number of ways that you can use that tool to actually create a profile of what a good fit is going to look like. You can go through a series of questionnaires asking you to consider things around what's important from this role. An example of that would be perhaps if you're going to be recruiting someone that you want to literally stand in the same place every day, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, doing a repetitive, fairly mundane role, you want to know that the person you recruit is going to be happy to do that. happy to do that for a consistent long period of time. Equally, if you want someone that's going to be very entrepreneurial and go out there and drive a new business forward, you probably want somebody that's a lot happier with less clarity, a bit more empowerment and freedom. It's about finding the person that fits the requirement of the role. And if you don't know what good looks like and you don't consider what do we actually want, what do we need from this person, it's highly unlikely you're going to get a really good match. So that consideration of what does good look like for this role, and if you can have a sort of scientifically robust process that comes up with a profile for you, you can then start to match candidates to that profile. We can even look at creating compatibility reports that kind of show this person's strengths relating to that ideal profile. It highlights potential limitations that you can then perhaps drill down and explore a little further at the interview stage. But that fundamental principle is you have to consider what do we actually want, what does good look like, and if you don't do that, I think you're running the risk of not getting the best fit.
So we had the PPA reports, and there was lots of information in there for the candidates. So we had to work really closely with our client to make sure that they not only interpreted the reports correctly, but also that they used the reports as a guide to the interviewing process and selection process, rather than almost like a gate. It could have been very easy to just discount candidates based on those reports. Have you found any issues with clients using reports incorrectly, or have you found that you've had to get involved to help them understand and interpret those?
Yeah, I think essentially that is the key. They have to understand the report, they have to understand how to interpret it. We work very closely with our clients to help them interpret, maximise the value that they get from the report. There was an interesting point that you made there. We always position these things as an added piece of information. When you come to recruiting, I wouldn't advocate that anyone ever uses one thing in isolation. The PPA is giving you an extra piece of information. It's giving you a different dimension and a different way of considering that candidate. It's really giving you the piece that's often missing, which is the behaviourist piece. And as I said before, it's the behavioural faults that often result in people not staying or being fired. And I think, a key element to always bear in mind, these reports suggest likely behaviours, they indicate people's preferences and the way that they're likely to respond to situations. And that's how we always advocate that they're used.
We found that ourselves. So the final 3 candidates all had slightly different DISC-based profiles.
Yes.
And all 3 were in the running, and all 3 had exactly the same chance at the final stage. So for anyone who hasn't experienced DISC-based profiling before, do you want to just go through that a little bit more, just to tell what the indicators are and what DISC stands for?
DISC, essentially, the D stands for dominance, so that's all about sort of power and authority, and generally people that have a drive to achieve and win, drive for results. I stands for influence, and that's really all about working with and through people. The S is about steadiness, so it's about pace, basically. Someone with a higher S generally will like to work in a sort of methodical, structured, even-paced way. Someone with a lower S is more likely to be alert, perhaps get a little bit, they want to jump from task to task, maybe. And then the C is really about compliance. People with a high C generally are going to like to follow the rule, do things in a very compliant way. attention to detail, that kind of thing. Lower C people tend to either see things that they could find a better way of doing it, or they'd prefer to maybe do things in their own way. And this is where I think it's really important to stress at this point, there is no good or bad disc profile. There is no right or wrong disc profile. It's all about understanding what somebody's preferred behaviours look like, and then considering that in relation to what you want. I'll give you an example, actually. I was working with a client of mine recently who was looking to hire a new CFO. They needed a new chief financial officer, and historically, I would say, or the norm for hiring a CFO is probably someone that's got very high compliance. But when I asked this guy, he's the CEO, the owner of the business, talk to me about what you actually want. And he started using things like driving new initiatives through Europe. And as soon as he said drive, that kind of implies someone that has to have a little bit of dominance in there, because he wants this guy to drive this new sort of culture throughout the business. So you then start to move away perhaps from what people would think of a general CFO profile. And through going through that process of actually understanding what he wanted, we came up with a very different profile. The guy still had C in there, but he also had dominance and influence. And talking to Stephen, the MD of the business, about 5 months in, it's absolutely worked for him. Wow. And one of the questions I remember asking him is, do you want someone, Stephen, that's just going to say yes to everything you propose, or do you want someone that's going to push back and say, actually, I don't agree with that because, and someone that's going to challenge you? Yeah. He wanted someone that was going to challenge him. And that's where we ended up with D being a requirement of the profile. And it's worked a treat for him.
You made a really good point there about the shortfalls or weaknesses. I remember when we first met, two years ago now?
Yes.
And we were looking at benchmarking our top 50 salespeople. And I went through the assessment myself. Yeah. And the report came back, and it was like somebody was following me around. It was so accurate, considering it took 8 minutes. Yeah. My initial preconceptions were, I'll be able to trick this report. I'll be able to go back and think about what would I want to answer rather than what will I answer. And it was, you couldn't do that. Yeah. The question came up. I think you have 5 options. And you pick one, the question goes away, and it's really quick fire. It's question, answer, question, answer. And before you know it, you're done. And the report came back, and it was frightening how accurate it was.
Everybody who does that assessment tends to have a very similar reaction that, wow, how do they know this about me? What you have to remember is that it's deriving that output from the information that you input. Yeah. The scientific element behind it and the software that drives that is well ahead of my capability to explain in detail. But what I would say, we've run over 2 million PPAs. We're working now in over 60 countries globally with 35,000 different organisations. But the principle is the same, effectively, that if you understand what good looks like, if you understand, your people better, it will only deliver more positive outcomes. We work with a number of logistics companies globally, and they use a report called the driver report. Okay. For simple as it sounds, for the recruitment of drivers for their fleet. And I often ask this question to people. They tend to use that report so that they hire steady and compliant drivers. And I say to people, why do you think that is, and what do you think the value and the benefit is? And generally people say, but they have less accidents, or it helps with their insurance premiums, etc., which it does, because it shows due diligence in the recruitment process. But the biggest return on investment for those companies through something as simple as hiring a steady compliant driver is that they save huge amounts of money per annum on fuel. They save huge amounts of money on the mileage that they get from tyres, from brake discs, etc. Just a very straightforward example of how thinking, well, what does good look like for this job? Hiring people that fit that profile, it's a huge return on investment in a very, very straightforward way.
Okay. So, Nigel, we've worked together on this role in particular, and we've had amazing success. We've got a head of sales in there now. If you're watching, well done, congratulations. But that isn't where it ends, is it?
Making a recruitment decision and hiring someone is actually the start point of the journey. I quite often see that actually is the end point for some organisations, and we've hired the person, off they go. And I think one of the really, really critical considerations when you make a hire, it's a big investment. That person can have a huge impact on your business moving forward or on your organisation. So it's really, really important to make sure that the process is ongoing, not just we've hired somebody. Off the back of the PPA assessment, we can actually produce an onboarding report. And essentially the idea of the onboarding report is to say, okay, Phil, we've made a decision, we've hired you, you're starting working on Monday, but ahead of you starting, wouldn't it be great if your line manager or the person you're going to be reporting to could get a report that says, hey, what to expect from your new starter? Think about, this is Philip, he's starting working for you on Monday. Considerations about his strengths, his limitations, what's he going to bring to your team? And it gives you information to consider around how to approach communicating with this person to get the best response, how to approach motivating this person and supporting them, and considerations for the development of this person moving into the future. And I think one of the sad things is that a lot of people, when they do start work in a new organisation, they all get exactly the same onboarding or induction process regardless of who they are. And this is kind of saying, look, if you really want to get the most out of this investment and maximise this person's contribution, just consider how to go about onboarding them, introducing them, supporting them, to really make sure that we bespoke that onboarding process to maximise the value of it. And it's as simple as that, really. It makes absolute sense.
Yeah, we see on LinkedIn all the time of great companies having, you turn up at your desk on day one and there's a personalised, there's maybe a laptop and notepads and chocolates and things. Yep. I think Warburton's do an amazing box they send out to you before you start. Which is fantastic, okay? Because that's supporting you. You're going to have fears. Did I make the right choice? Is it right for me, my career, my family? And it's alleviating some of those fears. But what about the emotional side and supporting you in those first few weeks where it's a roller coaster? You've left colleagues behind who you've probably spent years with, or you've maybe moved, or you've got a different journey into work. There's lots of things going on. And that is the time where, if it's going to fail and those fears are going to be highlighted, it's the onboarding. And,
yes.
and to get back from a bad onboarding experience is obviously so much more difficult than if you have a good onboarding experience. I think Indeed did some amazing statistics about the amount of people who change jobs and go on to Indeed to look for new jobs within the first 6 months. I think it's around 33%.
Yes.
So what we did together on this is fantastic. Onboarding, it is about making sure that not only are they happy, but also that the team that they're going to be working with are also prepared. I think a lot of companies forget about those.
No, absolutely, Phil. And I think it's an interesting point you raised there as well about teams, because one of the applications, again, for the PPA tool as an example, is it in terms of developing teams, and I'm talking about developing teams into that high performance culture where you maximise the value that team delivers to your organisation. I see a lot of teams in inverted commas in business that really are nothing more than a group of individuals that share a workspace. For a high performing team, it's really essential that everybody in the team understands their own strengths, their own limitations, but also the strengths and limitations of their colleagues. And that's how you start to lean on other people's strengths. You start to support other people's limitations. You start to work towards a high performance culture. And what better way, because we've all been in team scenarios where we know there's a new person starting next week, and everybody's saying, I wonder what they're like, and you're trying to make a judgment call from what you've seen, what you've heard. People look them up on LinkedIn to see what they've done before, and there's kind of a preconception then made before they've even been met. So what better way to overcome that and really sort of facilitate a great onboarding process than to say to the other team members, hey guys, this is Philip, he's starting work with us next week. This is kind of what to expect,
Absolutely. And here at Four Seasons Talent, we really value having the data and having all of that information behind our recruitment processes and our partnerships with clients, because that allows us to be consultative with them, to give them real insight into what's going on, not just the numbers, we've rejected 50 candidates, for example, but also to give them real insight into what's going on and also set them up for a win. Yes, in the recruitment business, we get paid for what we do and working with our clients, and there is a rebate, but ultimately we're not there to have somebody just go in for 6 months. We're there to find the right candidate for them, so they can grow and they can expand, and it's an asset to them. That's what we want to do. We want to partner with our clients. And we see Thomas International and the reports and our relationship with yourself as being fundamental to really allowing us to elevate what we do for our clients and allow them to move forward as well. So
for sure,
I really appreciate all of the support, all of the training, and the ongoing training. We are looking to become accredited trainers with Thomas International as well. So what would you say for those companies that haven't used PPA style assessments? Do you have any top tips for them, or any small little nuggets of Nigel experience? And what they can do and how they start thinking about things differently? Yeah,
absolutely. I think I'm a big believer in simplifying things, and I think overcomplicating and issues is something that you see a lot in business, and it actually clouds what's really important. It's those principles of you've got to consider what does good look like when you're going to recruit, and that's absolutely including the technical side or the other capabilities that might be essential, the hard skills. All that's important, as is experience perhaps. It should never be disregarded, but you have to consider the behaviours. What do we want to attract? What don't we want to attract that could really derail things and create an issue within our business? I think for yourself as a recruiter, Phil, things like that onboarding piece, it differentiates you massively, because it's a step beyond where a lot of recruitment businesses stop, but it's absolutely essential to maximising the value of the person. So giving consideration to how are we going to onboard this person in a way that's a good fit for them, is going to maximise their experience and make it feel good. An interesting statistic, if we go back to take a sort of step right back and say, well, why do organisations come to you, and why do they often need to recruit in the first place? It might obviously be due to expansion, or it might be due to a new role they've created, but often it's due to the fact that they've got quite high levels of attrition in their business currently. And a question I often ask clients or prospective clients, that I'll say, well, what are the main challenges you face? And it's very common that they will say attrition is too high, the churn's too high, or however they choose to articulate it. And I always say to them, well, that's interesting, and rest assured you're not alone in that. It's very common in the current climate. But let me ask you, why do you think it is? And invariably, they will say to me, we're not recruiting the right people.
Yeah.
And absolutely, that can be a part of the issue, and it will invariably be a contributory factor. But I'll often ask them questions around, well, talk to me about how you appoint your leaders, your managers. If you are an organisation that enjoys top quartile levels of engagement, you will generally enjoy around about 64% lower levels of attrition in your business. That's a statistic from a Gallup poll. So if you consider, if you've recruited the right person, absolutely the best fit for that job, how you onboard them, how you integrate them into the team, how you communicate with them and support them and motivate them ongoing is actually very, very relevant to how engaged they are going to be with that role moving forward. If they become disengaged, regardless of how good a fit they are likely to get frustrated, they are likely to leave, you're likely to be back to square one. And I think that's where what you're doing at the recruitment stage can actually add a lot of value ongoing through that employee's life cycle with the organisation.
Okay, great. And you talk about value. So having assessments and pre-profiles and then having onboarding reports, it isn't free. Okay, there is a cost involved, not only just resources and time as well, but you need to look at the bigger picture. So I've been internal recruiter, and one of the biggest challenges for me is internal stakeholder engagement and being able to show them ROI. Spending X amount here will deliver X amount here. And for all of the things that you've talked about, the improvement in attrition, the training, the L&D, the recruitment costs, the job boards, adverts, agencies, however you do that, that's a huge saving. But then also, what about the performance and the productivity, the amount of time it takes for a new hire to get up to a level? There are significant numbers there of savings by making sure you get the hire right at the first time and giving them the best possible experience so they can be successful.
Everybody is conscious of return on investment. If you're going to spend your budget on something, you want to know that it's going to add value. Fortunately, a lot of people in the current market actually see that value in advance, but quite often demonstrating return on investment is challenging. Luckily, we have a very, very robust bank of testimonials and case studies that we're able to match to a lot of businesses' particular challenges to show what we've done for others. It's quite interesting. On our website, there's a library of case studies, often linked to recruitment issues, lowering attrition, which is a big challenge for a lot of organisations. There's one in particular that I always talk to people about, because it's an organisation, it's actually Siemens, the organisation, where they started off from a position of generally thinking that this was a waste of time, a waste of money, didn't work, they didn't believe in the value at all, but they agreed to trial it. So that it takes you on a journey of how they trialled using these assessments, and it's now taken them to the point where their big challenge in that organisation is actually, when don't we use these? Because the value was so evident to them that these assessments are now embedded as a whole part of their culture and their processes. And I think things like that actually are more powerful than I could sit and talk to people and articulate the value of our tools all day long. But I think there's a lot more validity attached to that when it's coming from a client that's in their workspace. And luckily, we have such a diverse range of clients. I said before, around about 35,000 different organisations now in 60 countries globally. The principles, the challenges, and the value is pretty much the same across all of them. If you get the right person for the role, as opposed to trying to hammer the proverbial square peg into a round hole, it's far better to recruit a round peg. if you then lead them in a way that actually is appropriate for their particular behaviours and personality, you maximise the value that you get from them. That's where the return on investment comes.
Great. Well, we've definitely seen the value in partnering with Thomas International, so much so that we are going to be offering that to all of our clients moving forward.
Fantastic.
I wish we'd have got the job profiling and an understanding of the value of that beforehand. We would have definitely used that on the head of sales role. And that key engagement with the stakeholders, getting them to understand the value. Now we've done that here at Four Seasons Talent, and we've got our own story to share. We can use that with our other clients to also show them how not only has it saved us significant time, we've also been able to improve their reputation from rejections of candidates that are unsuitable, because we have a clear indication of what they're looking for, but also saving them costs as well. We have no doubt we have exactly the right person in that role, and they are loving the job, and their onboarding has been fantastic. So we've seen the value. Hopefully by watching this today, you've seen the value as well. Thank you so much, Nigel. I really appreciate your time. And
my pleasure, Philip.